I think it's a sweet idea, which is the psychosocial stuff is just belonging. Can I feel a little less shitty about my hard life? Can I hear some inspiring or uplifting stories? Can I be connected to other folks around me, near me? And ideally, bonus points, can we do some good in the community, or some version of service? None of that has any mystical or metaphysical component.
No.
Right? It's just kind of communal self-help, same as it ever was.
When I think of a church space or whatever, I imagine something where everyone's experience of the archetype you're referring to, or, maybe someone experiences the divine as feminine and another experience as masculine, and the different stories that everyone has related to it are all valid and are all helpful to the community. Excited to connect with you both on here. Like I said in my post, I was really impressed by the conversation you had last time, and all my curiosity sparked as I was listening. And it's so easy to feel in these sorts of conversations that, to feel sort of nihilistic and like things are so uninspiring to hear people talk about where religion is at, and especially in America right now. But I started to feel, like someone was speaking and representing some of the things that I feel and proposing ideas maybe for how it doesn't have to look so dire, but pull on, some of the essential truths of these traditions to restore some sanity to the whole situation. So I'm excited to talk more about it.
Absolutely. Right. I think that Jamie and I, you'll discover, agree that it's pretty dire, though.
I was about to say, I think you got the wrong dudes, but yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think as I was listening to you guys talk, I was realizing what makes it so dire is just that the language that we now have has become so binary, like there's so much polarity in it, and it makes it so hard to even start talking about it, because every word, even Christian, sin, even Jesus Christ, I mean, they all seem to land with such bombs now because they have such strong, so interwoven with the things that they've come to represent politically. So it makes it so hard to have conversations about it without it having all these landmines, And I think that's really where I talked with you, Jake, about my interest in Christian mysticism lies, is that as someone that wasn't raised religiously, and I know you did have more of a background growing up that way, but I had just a very scientific household and atheist, and was drawn toward religion as like about a 14-year-old, and had a quite profound mystical experience, I would call it, when I was very young, that sort of opened my eyes to this concept of an unconditional love, or something that really existed, that euphoric experience. It's only come close from maybe psychedelic experiences, right? The thing that...
What that one to you?
Yeah, so being out, looking out in New Zealand and being kind of overwhelmed by, I was in a state of prayer, and then was sort of taken to what I call a sort of out of body experience that was filled with total euphoria. And it had a Christ aspect to it, but also a feminine presence to it. It was sort of this complete feeling of overwhelming love and being completely connected to everything around me, and utterly broken open, I guess, like a true mountaintop type experience that changed the course of my life forever, because I, had to go searching to religion to try to find, I guess, out what happened to me or what was going on in that moment. And I stuck around in the Christian religion for a little bit, trying to find answers to it, but quickly so much of the language reduced that experience to me and made it feel so that I couldn't grow within it, because it was not reflective of what I had experienced. And so when I discovered the mystics and their ability to hold paradox, right, this both and, or this ability that God could be both feminine and masculine, and that there was, room for the God being the breath, but also beyond us, transcendent, and suffering and joy coexisted. And, they rejected spiritual binaries, right? So I finally found some language for myself that could reflect more of the experience I'd had. But it's language more of the poetic. And as you know, I'm a musician and artist, and that was why I moved into this world, and why it was so much a calling on my life, is that it was able to express some of the stuff that was not being articulated with any dimension within religious traditions. So I had to seek outside of them. And I think so many of us are in those places where we don't find a home within the traditions that we're given. And so when you were speaking about trying to restore the myth at the heart of these traditions, the essential teachings that are so now being kind of thrown out and completely twisted and distorted, and the imagination and the need for direct experience, which seems to be so by the wayside now. The whole intent, I think, of initiating religion was to try to make sense of experiences that human beings have when trying to create, or rather seek out meaning. I don't know, that's just a jumping off point, but that's sort of, I experienced that in myself, that frustration of wanting to find language that we can talk about this stuff with, that's not immediately putting, a box on things or attaching it to something which is so completely not what I believe to be true of the Christ teachings. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, what comes to mind for me as you're describing it is, there's a book that I find super duper helpful for recovering, whatever, people of faith. It could be Mormon, it could be Jewish, it could be Christian. This particular book is by a former Catholic monk named Jim Marion, and the book is called Putting on the Mind of Christ. And it basically just, he was kicked out because he was gay. So he's like, all right, a church that doesn't love me, like I have to rethink my whole relationship to this thing. But basically he just takes developmental psychology and, spiral dynamics and various other kind of models and just lays it against relationships to faith. And so he's like, oh, what you were just describing, right? You had an unio mystico experience, right? You had a straight up I, thou, our, or I hit. You then went seeking down the stack to where you found organized religion, if I was hearing your story right, and you found that felt constraining, binary, rigid, etc. Elaine Pagels, the famous Princeton scholar who's just released a kick-ass book last month, New York Times bestseller, called Miracles and Wonder, she speaks of going to a Billy Graham revival in giant stadium as a kid growing up on the Stanford campus, and she was like swept up by the faith of it, and goes down, as he does his call to prayer, goes down to be baptized and born again. So she's like a high schooler, self-steering, does that. It's like, yeah, I feel the Holy Ghost. And then tragically loses a friend. Funnily enough, she's in the car with Jerry Garcia, the guitarist of the Grateful Dead. Before the Grateful Dead, one of their friends get killed. And then she goes back to church seeking solace. And her church member's like, well, he wasn't a believer. He wasn't saved. He's going to be in hell. And she's like, fuck that noise. And gets booted back out. So anyway, this book, Putting on the Mind of Christ, just says, look, there's a stack of developmental stuff, and most churches are orthodox law and order. What in spiral dynamics is kind of blue. You might then go up to kind of basically sort of orange agentic. How does religion work for me personally and individually? You might go up to kind of Unitarians and Quakers, and then be like, it's all about community. And then you might go beyond that. And at each of those levels, you have both an exoteric, like here's what we teach on Sunday school, and an esoteric level. So there's kind of the secret within the secret at each of those levels. As you were talking, I was like, I'm imagining, I would guess, that once you get to the post-conventional levels, which is into the realms of the mystics, exoteric and esoteric disappear, those distinctions, and there is just that. There is just the lived experience of the christened one.
There's this quote, Meister Eckhart, that says, if one is to know God, one is to must let go of God, right? So it's that all these images and all of these archetypes and even all the things that we try to make sense of, they're there to provide a containment, but eventually to be let go of altogether. And so that is that kind of, the breaking open into the unknown seems to be the final destination that we're being led to. But these things are sent to, I guess, trigger the creativity to imagine, which I hear you talk about as well, is like, how do we resurrect the imagination and the mystery in these traditions, which can, he talked about there not being one necessary singular Jesus, but that it opens up and that this, Christ consciousness that gets talked about, which begins to start to sound like something that could speak to people that, sorry, my dog, that are struggling with this kind of very one lane way of perceiving the Christ, as opposed to this ever evolving figure that has so much to kind of speak to people at a time when there's just so much of it's just been hijacked. I feel that, and I feel the emotional weight of that these teachings that are so crucial to our, connection to each other and our ability to seek out transcendence. I really liked what you said about not throwing, having to kind of throw it away altogether, but to be able to turn up with the same teachings, reimagined, but well, rather recovered back to where they, really started, and being able to give, because, it requires some whole new way of bringing together the different experiences that people have had. If people were able to speak about their different experiences from, like you said, the esoteric and actually, this is where interfaith dialogue comes in, but I host a meditation group where we do read some of the things that Jesus has said, but we have a Buddhists attend the group and digest those scriptures through their lens. And in this proposed idea that you have of the church of the good, beautiful, and true, how could that work with having people from different faith traditions, or different, whether it's psychedelics as well, or different experiences, speak into the Christian tradition, which still has something powerful for the world, but has been just completely divorced from its original meanings.
Yeah, and Danielle, I also want to give you a chance to jump in here if there's anything that's of interest for you to comment on.
Sure. I mean, I guess my question was, I was listening to Kimbra, was like, how far back does the deviation from the original teaching go? Like, sort of like an idea, right? Was it the 4th century? Was it reading like Howard Armstrong's book on like the history of Western religion or whatever? And it's like, yeah, I mean, we don't have
Nicaea. That's an easy pin in the map.
That's a pin in the map. But even before that, it wasn't so clear. Anyway, but go ahead, dive back into the good, true, and beautiful, and I'll pipe up again.
Sure. Well, I mean, a couple of things, Kimbra. I mean, one is, I feel like Christ consciousness has a shitty brand these days, and organized religion, like organized Christian religion, is hip to it. They're like, that's what those fucking New Agers try and smuggle in, and that way is the tempter. So I think it's on the part of any progressives to tighten up our game, theologically, scripturally, even sort of doctrinally, like, what the fuck are we talking about? Or is this just a groovy placeholder for narcissistic spiritual bypassing, right? So there's that. But that said, if you're saying, hey, how can you, interact with, animate, reflect upon, the archetype of the Christ, and do so in a way that both does it justice and feels, tight, trustworthy, pedagogically or theologically sound, and yet it doesn't reenact the dividing lines and the schisms of the past, right? You can look back to, I mean, how, Ralph Waldo Emerson and that crew, standing up Unitarianism. There's Baha'i faith. There's a lot of efforts at this over the last few centuries. And the question is, at least for me right now, is, as there appears to be this religious turn that's happening right now, and there are many, many more people coming back into the fold and expressing faith, you can just look, just kind of look from a sort of sales and marketing point of view. And what it really seems like is the ones that are winning in the mimetic space are strangely or paradoxically not the most inclusive, not the most flexible. They're actually the ones with some of the highest and hardest bars to clear, the most defined doctrine, right? And the least kind of oopy-groovy Unitarian Universalist pitches. But that said, I think you can absolutely make a case, hey, look, for anybody hanging out on chats like this, or is in TED conferences and big idea conferences and publications like Substack, you're like, all right, more or less we're in the Western tradition, lineage, idiom, and more or less let's use the tools we have versus poaching other people's.
Right. Or throwing them out altogether and saying, well, we can't do anything with it. Yeah.
Totally. So then a way to sort of both honor some form of rigor and precision without having the boundaries be rigid and exclusionary or whatever, is you can sort of just say, hey, this is like middle C. You're a musician, right? So you're just like, hey, this is songs in the key of life, right? This is songs in the key of the Western tradition. And, the Hellenic tradition, the Hebraic tradition, the Christic mystic tradition, you could sort of say there's Eleusis on the Greek side, there's burning bushes and Arks of the Covenant on the Hebrew side, and there's the Christian Gnostic / on the Christian side. So that's where that's our middle C. We can go off and riff. We can weave in, Hafiz and Rumi. We can come back. We can check out Kali and Krishna and Arjuna. In the Gita, we can do indigenous traditions from the Western Hemisphere, but we resolve or return back to songs in the key of life, or at least songs in this instance in the key of the Western mystery school. And I feel like that gives us permission to be completely inclusive of anything and everything that also expresses resonant concepts, metaphors, analogies, but also not just be adrift musically or theologically. We do know where this thing resolves back to.
I love that you use the word resonant, because I think a lot about resonance, the tuning fork of actually being able to send out a resonance, and then when other people bring a note in as well, it's not just about pitch, but it's about finding air and space with one another and actually forming a resonant vibration. And I think about that when people come together and they're able to share their different experiences within this realm. If there was more space for people to not feel like they had to have a position as soon as religion comes up, but rather, as Rilke says, to live the questions, to realize that the whole point of these institutions beginning in the first place was to be able to search out from a place of everyone not having the answer. That's sort of the beautiful democratic space of it, that nobody fully knows or can answer the question of who Jesus was, whether it was historical, like you said, myth, or all of this. But what we can feel toward it is the resonance of the story and what it represents, and this death and resurrection, and that can relate to a lot of Buddhist texts as well. There's so many other things that resonate alongside with it, and it feels like with that starting point, like you said, if we know that there's resonance in this Western tradition, how do we bring things alongside it that cannot feel threatening to, because I think that's the thing is with fundamentalist Christianity right now, it's like anything outside of the prescribed dogma feels like a threat to the understanding of Christ, rather than a deepening into the tradition or an excitement to it of like you're unfolding it. How does one get back to that feeling like a place of freedom as opposed to division and like wanting to shut out anything that doesn't align only with the one text?
Danny boy, have a crack.
Well, I mean, I think, it sounds like you're already at that place. I mean, I guess in general, religion works differently for different types of people, right? I mean, there are a lot of people who really are maybe at a stage of their evolution where they just want like kind of rules and structures and somebody to kind of like impose that over them.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I mean, you find that even in indigenous cultures, not everybody is like some high-level initiate. Some are just like the common people. And, that's okay. I think the problem is when there isn't a core group that are actually undergoing initiatory processes, then the whole thing just goes off the rails. Then you have like, you only have the indoctrinatory structures, people who are maybe like doing ritual, a little bit empty, and they're still struggling with their own ego stuff, whether it's around like sexuality as in the Catholic Church or whatever, or greed and power as it is with fundamentalist churches. You kind of have nothing. So it seems like we've, the only way, and this is kind of something Jamie and I talk a lot about, would be to kind of reconstitute kind of a healthy kind of, quote unquote religion, would be if there was like a strong initiatory core that also had a kind of, kind of moral, ethical, philosophical, metaphysical foundation. Because without that, yeah, it's like, it's too ineffable, or it's too open to interpretation or whatever. That's why I personally really like monistic idealism that Bernard Kastrup develops, because I think it's actually very stable and makes much more sense than, reductive materialism or, panpsychism. It gives us like a stable way. I mean, it's a new way, it's more the idea that consciousness is the foundational reality, rather than the material worlds, but I think, yeah.
Unpack that. So how does, because I mean, I'm down with monistic idealism. I find it interesting. Well, like Kastrup's stuff, but as far as pedestrian, accessible morality, ontology, etc., like, hey, the kids, this is the way the world works, and this helps you on Monday morning be a less shitty human. How would you bridge that gap?
It's a bit of a tough one, but I think it starts with a group that have that initiatory core. I mean, it's kind of like with, if you've ever visited like Tibetan Buddhist culture, whether it's in Dharamsala or in like Nepal or whatever. I mean, it's like there are some of these lamas who are really like going for it. There's tangible, real kind of evidence. They have the tuktam where they die, their bodies don't decay for weeks, or they have rainbow bodies where their bodies turn into light. These are documented. These things actually happen, so that esoteric practice ultimately produces tangible, visible results. Like that's why everybody was so excited with Christ walking on water or turning loaves into fishes or something. It's like, then it's like, oh, okay, it's like they're not just like talking about it, they're actually like stuff's happening here. Like I can see that there's like a transmutation or transmutation of the material plane is actually legit and possible. But I think yeah, and so then like, most people in like Tibetan community are, they don't know about, they're not thinking about emptiness, or they're not thinking about the primordial nature of mind. They like have a more worshipful approach to the Dalai Lama. That's okay. They're more in a devotional, they're more like, in like the sort of Indian system. They're different, we don't have a cat, but I wouldn't want to impose that. But on some level, there's truth to it. I think that there are different types of people, and there are different types of religiosity or spirituality that are kind of appropriate for people at different stages of development, and it's like, for some people, they're at that point where the direct gnosis, the initiatory kind of self-discovery, the freedom of understanding that so many things are actually mental construct, so on, like that is the right path. And then, what you would need is those people who've kind of reached that state of, maybe stability and that more esoteric realms, then to sort of figure out how you, as you say, kind of like build the bridge or find the middle sea that then can like transmit out to everybody else,
Seems like, yeah, keep going. Sorry, James.
That's okay. It was basically, I mean, it seems to me like we're really talking about kind of the culture architecture of this, like how would one go about building it, right? That you really can't get away from the esoteric. What is fundamentally the pro-social, pro-psychosocial? Like it's good for my mind and heart, and it's good for my connectivity to my community, bread and circus. And then what is the esoteric mystery school within that? And whether or not they truly bleed over, I'm unclear, right? In many cases, they were monastic. They were removed from that. And even like the Cathars back in the day, right? Arguably one of the more profound and pronounced mystical sects of the Middle Ages, right? That spun up the Spanish Inquisition against them and all that stuff for folks that playing along at home. But also they had two different groups. They had the bonhommes, the good people, and that was the majority of the folks, the exoteric. And then they had the perfecti, the ones who had actually taken all the full vows and the full initiatory experience. And it seems to me like it might be like, wow, we're very sort of non-hierarchical and democratic and egalitarian in our days, and like God consciousness should be for everyone. You're like, yeah. And not everybody wants it or is ready for it, or it matches or blends with a householder's path and 1,000 other things. So what is the difference between, and Sunday Assembly, they started in England, but they have, branches around the world, but they were like, they all were sort of bounced Anglicans. They were Church of England. As kids, they got out and their founders were like, well, what do we miss the most? We miss the singing and we miss the tea and cakes afterwards. So can institute that. Now, sadly, they've done cheesy pop songs like Journey, Don't Stop Believing and stuff. I feel like they've skewed a little too easy, but I think it's a sweet idea, which is the psychosocial stuff is just belonging. Can I feel a little less shitty about my hard life? Can I hear some inspiring or uplifting stories? Can I be connected to other folks around me, near me, so I feel less alone? And ideally, bonus points, can we do some good in the community, or some version of service? None of that has any mystical or metaphysical components,
No.
right? It's just kind of communal self-help, same as it ever was. Now, then the secret within the secret would be, okay, now what is the confirmation experience? What's the literal christening? And would there be, just like confirmation in any Protestant or even Catholic tradition, months to year of preparation, the initiatory experience itself, and then you are welcome, to your point, Daniel, into a level of both standing up for the church and its principles, so higher expectations of you, and also some probably visible signifiers of you now helping facilitate or share the vibe, because you've now tasted the thing.
I feel like so many people are searching for the ineffable and looking for spaces where they can have all those things you just mentioned, Jamie, but also if there is no other space for the mystery and the things that the mystics touch on, which is this kind of you're breaking open experience or transformation, or having maybe even an experience with a scripture where they interpret it completely, the mystery of it's unfolded, which of course a lot of these scriptures were meant to be read in these ways, where they weren't completely appealing just to the mind, but rather to be kind of digested and opened up, or the mystery of them revealed, through discussion and through contemplation, really, and meditation, right? And so I think about the power of having people that have all had experiences within these spaces that are transformative in some way. They've had, and whether that's through silence and holding spaces together, or retreat type things, or just, studying the mystics, being able to understand that awe and surrender and these kind of values are crucial to kind of a transformative inner experience. Without that, I feel like it makes people so prone to becoming just the binary experience, because there's no direct portal to the thing that actually is what everyone is turning up there for, which is to penetrate something that we are all hungry for, this kind of deeper meaning and understanding of this figure that, like you have said, has shaped the last 2,000 years, but it's been given to us in such a sort of rigid way that there's no sense of being able to unpack it and unfold it with all of our different gifts, with those that do come at it through a cerebral lens, an intellectual lens, which is so important for the theology of those scriptures. And then those like the artists and the poets that can understand, like we all, that when I think of a church space or whatever, I imagine something where everyone's experience of the archetype you're referring to, or maybe someone experiences the divine as feminine and another experiences as masculine, and the different stories that everyone has related to it are all valid and are all helpful to the community. But I'm trying to just identify within the structure you set up there, if there's how to integrate a space in there that's for people to have transformative experiences that can be likened to some of this mystical stuff, which actually starts the transformation of people getting on board with the radical side of what Jesus taught, which is this topsy-turvy worldview, right? The first shall be last. The kingdom of heaven is within you. Like ideas that just get so skimmed over, or for teaching on money, and it seems like you can't grasp this stuff until there's been some sort of inner shift in the heart that can then turn you toward a devotion, or the word surrender or something. I don't know if that's sparking anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's what strikes me is, because we just did this sort of survey of Austin churches over the last 3-4 months, and went to several services. It's the first time I'd been in a church for actual services in decades. And I found it really interesting because they were, they shared an incredibly similar format. They were all in basically non-sanctified buildings. They looked like conference centers, office spaces or whatever they were. Big jumbotron screens, that kind of thing. So no even like architecture, no nave, sacristy, none of the cruciform buildings, no even altars, just big jumbotrons. So like not even a focal point, which I thought was really, I was like, wow, this is bizarre, but like completely, stripped of it all and just PowerPoint slides, digital shit.
I know.
And then, and we were noticing, okay, who's growing, who's booming, not the ones who are struggling. Like these are the ones that are rolling out and buying up other churches. They've cracked something. They've got product market fit and they've got traction. What's going on under the hood? And I think we surveyed it. I don't think I was missed there. I don't think there was a secret within the secret. Like I don't think we were not getting invited to the sexy after party. Like I think we saw what it was, and it was incredibly weak sauce. It wasn't even, because I mean, imagine if you're going in England or you're going in Europe and you're in some beautiful 1,000-year-old cathedral, you're gonna feel it. You're gonna be like, holy shit, okay, I'm feeling the feels because the place I'm in, the space I'm in, the history, none of that, right? And it was just follow the bouncing ball, cheesy ass Jesus rock with like rhyme schemes you can fucking spot, stanzas away, and you're like, that's it. That's your ecstatic technology. Like,
ecstatic technology. That's right.
So incredibly weak sauce was my feeling, other than some version of basically, what's the word? I mean, it's Emile Durkheim, right? The sociologist notion of collective effervescence, right? How do you create that communitas feel? How do you create the thing of like, I'm here among my brothers and sisters and there's nowhere else I'd rather be on a Sunday morning.
The Burning vibe.
Well, yeah, but I mean, Burning Man drops it, right? This is it was just like lame ass white folks raising their hands in their Bible. It's like, oh. And I'm like, really, people? Like, you guys need to get out more. But it was effective, right? It worked. And so I think what we're asking, or at least what I hear you asking, is what is an authentically, mystically centered expansion and expression of Christ consciousness / all mystery worship, which to me is a question within the question as to what's going on right now with this religious turn and the what's and whys and hows of the majority of that effort, because I think the majority of the effort is actually depressingly pedestrian.
Oh yeah,
but still working
and tribal. I mean, it's what need is it filling? It's filling a sense of belonging. A lot of those churches as well, everybody tends to look the same, dress the same. It's that sense of coming together and just feeling like you fit. You get told the teachings that make you feel comfortable, which a lot of Jesus' teachings were not comfortable at all and were highly challenging to the status quo and to one's own life. And they fulfill a purpose, don't they, of just making you walk out kind of unchanged, which is the complete opposite of the transfiguration idea of like being actually changed from the inside out. So there's a real disconnect there from the original teaching.
And same as it ever was, right? I mean, I think there has always been that tension between Paul and Thomas, right? Between the bureaucrat and the experiential mystic. And time again, the bureaucrats have won. And so liberation theology in South America and Central America, like the African American, like we identify with the Hebrews in Egypt and Exodus and Rasta, theology, all that kind of stuff has always been at odds with the powers that be and the self-appointed priest class who have sought to mediate divine power and authority, use it to drive and govern control of the peasants, and to radically suppress, neuter, or diminish the revolutionary impulse of the actual teachings of the Nazarene.
Jamie, you've been writing a little bit about what's happening with the sort of tech oligarchy, the tech elite, and their embrace of this kind of like right-wing fundamentalist or evangelical Christianity. How are they managing? Because these were, mostly like, I mean, I guess Thiel was sort of Catholic. I mean, Vance, I guess, converted to Catholicism. But how are they managing the contradictions from their, sort of hyper-materialist, hyper kind of avaricious, kind of like empire-building ideology and then kind of like try to find their way into this new Christian moment in a way.
with brazen balls of steel, I think.
I like the word used, muscular. Muscular is the word.
Yeah. I mean, there was an article, I think, in the New York Times this morning. We've been observing it, taking the piss out of it for ages because we're geeks. But like fundamentally, how on earth is it that Silicon Valley has now taken the Lord of the Rings and corrupted it and perverted it, to their own goals of like actually wanting to be Sauron, and you're like, wait, what the fuck? And, and then talking about Asimov's Foundation series and, all the sci-fi and fantasy mythologies that are just getting conveniently co-opted to roll out the military surveillance state. And added to that, I could say you could add the Christian mythologies. So I would say they're of a feather with sci-fi, fantasy, and, Christianity, which is just, this is convenient. We're going to pick and choose like motherfuckers. We're actually sometimes going to flat out invert the morals and the messages of these stories just because they're really well known. And you end up with, the smidge of apocalyptic, the hour is, ends justify the means because we're going to save the world. So a messianic impulse and an apocalyptic crisis, which will then justify us seizing the reins. And then this notion that I have found just I think it's helpful, right? I think I read it for the first time a month ago, but it was the notion of the divide between the cradle Christians and the convert Christians. So the cradles versus the converts, and the cradles, especially in Eastern Orthodoxy and, Arch Catholicism, always defer to the popes and the bishops. Like it is hierarchical as fuck, and the guys at the top have a direct hotline to God. They are infallible, literally, and technically, they're infallible. You do not question them. Versus the converts who have actually been radicalized online with these hyper-masculine cosplay medieval versions of these religions, and they're coming on board with all sorts of expectations and hopes, and then they're like, you fuck bishops and popes are a bunch of fucking cucks. We want to send it, and actually stick it to the libtards. And so we're seeing this bizarre schisming even within these supposedly orthodox and traditional faiths by the, there is no fervor like the newly converted. And these folks are looking to roll shit back, 1,000 years pre-Reformation. And basically, and I made this case at some point in recent writing, but basically that what we're dealing with in the fundamentalist Christian turn right now is a continuation. It's an aftershock of the American Civil War. It is a rejection of mainline Protestantism, and it is a resurgence of this kind of virulent evangelical Pentecostal hyper-fundamentalist strain, which was like, fuck you in the North, and you Methodists and Lutherans and Presbyterians and Episcopalians, like, fuck you guys. And we in the cricks and hollers of Appalachia and everywhere else are nursing these wild hairball ones with demons and possessions and, everything else. And that was a late 19th, early 20th century uniquely American metastasization and a pre-Reformation throwback. So basically, when Samuel Huntington and Sam Harris were saying that after 9/11, they were saying that that Islam is so dangerous and it's so incompatible with modern democracies because they never had a Reformation. This is some medieval ass shit these guys are throwing down. That's not safe in a multicultural, rule of law, League of Nations society. And therefore, fuck them, they're dangerous. You could make this case that what we're seeing now as Christian fundamentalism in America is arguably pre-Reformation, batshit crazy, and now in charge of all the weapons and the nukes.
Yeah.
What's so tricky as well is that the people that, you mentioned the Episcopalians and the Quakers and those that don't hold these views, but the problem is they're not the ones on the streets that feel the need to Bible bash, that feel the need to get on headlines. They're doing the work at the soup kitchen down the road. They're preaching the humble sermons. They're doing the work on the ground. They're never the ones with the loud voices or you do have Elaine Pagels and people you've mentioned that are having these really big moments with books, which is so important, and new theologians coming up, but we don't get to hear from the other side as much. Because they're not looking to swing their dicks and make a big noise about it. It's like it's the humble road, the more Christ-like way, which is to, he wasn't all about starting a church, and the church wasn't even in the Bible, starting a religion, So it's this tricky tension, because you have this teacher that actually is this humble, and actually the way of the Christ is the way of the servant, right? That's the highest form that you can be, is to be of service. And yet the other representation we're getting of it is the domination paradigm. But how do you get those smaller voices, the other side, to actually feel as riled up to speak out for it?
I don't think that it's not that they're, I don't know about, I don't think that's not that those voices are not trying to speak out. It's that you simply don't get heard because you have the money in this country, like the Heritage Foundation. I think they have like an $800 million budget a year, so it's like the oil money and the sort of, early money in the US, all those people who went into this, Christian denominationalist kind of a thing, they've just been fueling this fire, with cash. And if you're on the other side of like, oh, let's be Gnostic, let's be shamanic, let's integrate, the different, traditions and find the truth that's beyond, the religious indoctrination, you don't get, you don't get platformed as much. I think it's
a place of paradox, like we were saying before. It's a place that often traverses not a simple answer that can be just relayed in a way that everyone can grasp onto easily. That's the thing about a lot of these teachings. You think of Zen koans or the Desert Fathers and Mothers, the kinds of teachings they have that are meant to sort of, in a way, bamboozle you out of your normal way of thinking, so that you can digest something in a way that opens the heart, or even the mind as well, the psyche, much like I guess psychedelics can do, right? You don't see things the way you saw them before, and so presenting these different ways of interpreting the Christ story is so difficult, because they're not. People want to settle on a firm answer, right? They want a firm identity and a firm conclusion, which the whole point of it, I think, a lot of religious searching is that it's this, it doesn't have a firm arrival. That's the whole point of what human beings keep consistently needing to try to answer these things through inquiry, spiritual inquiry of some sort.
Well, it seems like, because Kimbra, you're continually coming back to a theme, which I think I'm now picking up, which is, it almost feels like we're talking about two distinct threads or channels. One is Hermeticism. Can I have the I or I thou experience? The other is Mimeticism. How do you mobilize and rally a fuck ton of people? And the reality is that 1 to 10% max is even eligible, and an appropriate match for the Hermetic flash. The only way you mobilize the masses, which we also appear to be talking about, because we're talking about the state of play in the country and, and politics and all that, is Mimeticism, aka storytelling. And those are distinct, right? They overlap, where they might inform, there might be a secret inside the secret of the stories we're telling for the Hermetics, right? But it fundamentally do our stories work? And I think that if we're doing a sort of post-mortem on why is it that alt-right, right-wing, crypto-fascists have hijacked all the storytelling. I mean, the last months. Say this again?
And language,
Yeah. Right. And and also let's just acknowledge that the last 6 months has seen a swing so much further to the furthest right than anybody, including the architects of the swing, possibly imagined or predicted. So the fact that Curtis Yarvin and let's get past democracy altogether, not let's win so our team runs democracy or fixes it or brings it back to what we think it should be. Let's fucking blow up the republic and start with 5 good emperors, right? And a CEO technocrat. Like, we're like, whoa, okay, that's a whole other thing. But for the progressive side of the fence, and or true Christians, or whatever you want to say, is good-hearted people who would like to live and let live, right? Has to do a post-mortem on the last decade where the far left completely shattered our mimetics, our shared mimetics, right? Because what we had was, and this is true for every single reform movement in U.S. history, going from abolition to suffragettes to MLK and civil rights 1.0, there was always that return, to Lincoln and Gettysburg, right? Was, hey, we've fucked up, we're in a rough spot, but let's return back to first principles. 47 years ago, shining cities on hill, American experiments, the American dream, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Bush did it after 9/11. Obama did it after the Charlottesville, was it Charlottesville? Yeah, I think it was the Charlottesville shootings, right? Every moment of crisis, we've returned back to double down on the promise of the city on the hill. Social justice warriors blew that fucking city on the hill to smithereens. They said George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Abraham Lincoln were genocidal maniacs and slaveholders and hypocrites. Changed the names on the elementary schools. There is no American dream. If a white person dares utter MLK's famous thing, a man should be judged not by the color of his skin, but by the content. He's a fucking patsy and a cock, and oh, by the way, so's MLK, right? And so, in some respects, the social justice attack on what was this treasure chest of American memes to call us up to the better angels of our nature. They nuked it. And as a result, we ended up with a staph infection, right, of Curtis Yarvin, of these neo-reactionaries.
I'm a little bit more resistant to some of that story that you're just laying out there, in that, yes, there was a little bit of too much extremism on the part of this new progressive left. But on the other hand, generally, yeah, like culture moves through overcorrection and then kind of a seesaw movement. So, a lot of people, minorities, people of different identities, really had been shafted historically over hundreds of years. And yeah, for 20 years, they were maybe getting a moment, we're like, okay, the Whitney Biennial is like, there aren't so many white cis male young artists. It's all, and it was annoying, but I mean, this is such an overcorrection. Like, it's, I feel the story, there's like an equivalency there, is a false story, and it's one that benefits the narrative of the right, like the Jordan Petersons and all that kind of stuff. And it's not the case. I mean, it's like, it was annoying, but can you imagine how annoying it was if you were like Black and queer over the last like 200 years, when you couldn't fucking, do anything or surface in the society in any way whatsoever. So there was a short recalibration and a short overcorrection where some of these people who'd been marginalized and oppressed were sort of being stepped forward into the limelight in a way that was a little bit irritating. But I think it's a completely false equivalence. And the way the right has weaponized that and is now seeking to, roll back everything back to, as you say, like pre-Civil War or whatever. I mean, this is just unconscionable. So I feel it actually, to me, it boosts up their story a little bit by saying there was such an equivalency here when there really wasn't. White people still had the power. White men were still basically running all the corporations. It wasn't like suddenly 70% of the Fortune 500 corporations were run by like Black, queer, Native American, handicapped women. We were nowhere even near that. So I think it's a false equivalence. That's all I would say.
Oh, no, for sure. I had 3 more sentences just to bring
okay.
I agree with that. I'm not saying it's false equivalence. I'm saying the neo-reactionary Dr. Light were just itching for this excuse. And this was the opening strategically that was given to them.
Yeah.
Right. But what I would say is that progressives or anybody, or let's just say, Christ-centered Christians, anyone in that neck of the woods, you have to go back and reclaim and embrace American patriotism. You have to embrace traditional and faith-based value. We have to go into the memes play in order to reanimate and reclaim those things, because effectively the left of center seemingly set them all on fire. And so you have this incredible moderate middle of Americans that, even whether they're practicing or not, they are culturally and mimetically, they're Christian white Americans. And they feel that world has been completely attacked and marginalized by the people to their left, and the only people speaking to it and valorizing are on the right, but they're leading them like Pinocchio to Treasure Island, right? It's fucking hell realms.
And then there's, of course, all of the new age narcissism that you speak to, of all the other things that are popping up as other options. But now your ability to be discerning over what actually feels resonant and real and based on, the teachings that have like real value, there's all the options are now on the table of so many other kinds of spirituality that also seem to be adopting convenient language from other traditions to push their agendas. So it's a confusing time for people to and why it is so hard to talk about, because it feels like so many different parts of language have been hijacked to misrepresent what they essentially are there to do. Yeah.
And psychedelic Instagram shamans in Tulum aren't exactly holding up their end, you know? So if you are a preacher in a pulpit, and you're like, and beware the Luciferian temptations of that lot, you know, and they might even try and seduce you with entheogens and sacraments and access to Christ, the Christ consciousness, etc., except that is the silver-tongued tempter. Don't do it. They've got a fucking point, you know? So it really does feel like if there was to be an articulation, Kimbra, I mean, my hypothesis would be somehow to kindle a, whatever, who's counting, fourth great awakening, right? If there's been at least two solidly documented, somewhere in there was a third, and we're probably at least on our fourth, which would be each time there has been a great awakening in American history, it has been at a time of resistance to the stodgy, hypocritical doctrine of their parents and grandparents and the existing power structures that be, and a move towards more direct, more experiential, more egalitarian expressions of faith. And that happened in Cambridge, Kentucky in 1803. That happened in the 1780s. It happened again, take your pick. It could have been the hippie Jesus freaks, you know, whatever. But what would that look like if we could reclaim a grassroots, experiential, humanitarian, egalitarian sea of faith? And could we set that shit on fire and allow it, just like it did back in the day, burn over, right, all the old, the stodgy, and replace it with some beating heart, right, of, you know, socially just, right, spiritually overflowing, community-centered, experientially informed spirituality? Because that has played huge roles in American history in the past. And if we had a chance to do that, you could maybe take it back from the, you know, crypto-fascist neo-Nazis masquerading. I mean, what's the thing? Oh, who is it? Who said it? Oh, I think it was Sinclair Lewis. He said, when fascism comes to America, it will be wrapped in the flag and carrying a cross.
Yeah, I love that, David. I love that. I mean, I wish I felt more hopeful that was doable, but of course, one should try. It just also kind of feels that when things reach the kind of Nazi level, which I feel like a lot of people in this country have reached, it's like a fire that has taken them over to the point where it doesn't burn itself out until death. You know, and I hope that's not the case, but that is my concern right now. The sort of whatever Trump has lit up feels like it's just going to burn like a forest fire right now.
Well, I mean, I think that the word Jamie used, this kind of muscular version of Christianity, where they've taken all the conquering language of it and domination of it, it is frightening. And I'm not trying to downplay the consequences of that, but it can only go so far it can mobilize people very far. But I think that what we're all identifying is that there's a lot of people that exist with a different desire to a different orientation to the Christ tradition and the Christ himself, which actually sounds a little bit more like a feminine approach, and even embracing the divine feminine within that has less of a kind of domination paradigm and more of a partnership one, is what I'm hearing you saying, Jamie. Like everyone's bringing something to the space. You've got the social aspect, that there's a place for the mystical. I'm imagining that, you know, even maybe interfaith dialogue could come into there, where we learn about certain traditions through the lens of other people's traditions, like Thomas Merton. I mentioned big fan of his work, and he was one of the first kind of Catholic language where people can then and not try to necessarily convert one another to the other tradition, but speak into the space that is more, it has more fluidity. It can hold two things at once. It's not so, there is power to that too. It's not the same masculine approach, but it has a way of mobilizing people, maybe through some sort of, I mean, I see it at maybe by concerts as well, the way music that can take people to a moment where they get out of any concept of hierarchy and they're just all a sea of people immersed in a moment together, and those differences fall away. And I wonder if, I know it's hard to imagine that there could be more strength to a movement like this than the one we're seeing at the moment, just because, like you said, there's so much power and money behind it. But it's a different kind of power that you're talking to here that to me does have potential to light up the hearts. And when you get the spirit awakened and one feels like they have the possibility to offer something rather than just following a leader and just going, but they can bring something from their experience and from their tradition, even, what they've learned from their faith background. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. You're bypassing the middleman. You're delivering, ecstasis and communitas, right? You're delivering the peak experience of gathering around song, right? And in fact, there was maybe 15 years ago now, there was a group called Polyphonic Spree, and they were like long cassette. They would literally show up almost like a church choir, and they did. And I think they even showed up in some. They were in some soundtracks to like animated kids movies and this and that. Like "Reach for the Sun," I think was a song that was very famous of theirs. But Paul Simon saw them, and he's like, "Oh, guys, you got to fucking watch this, because like you guys are pulling that juice, and you got to be super duper careful of just like crash and burn of cultic energies." But to your point, if there was an opportunity to invite people into that kind of direct experiential communitas, and Daniel mentioned Burning Man, Grateful Dead is another obvious example. There's a handful of these traditions. Polyphonic Spree would be one, but I would imagine your services. I mean, hell, man, Swifties are having some form of communitas experience. Guys, question is can you point that in a direction that gets beyond the tribal memetics that are being activated and animated right now, the us versus them ones, into a felt sense, right, of the revolutionary and inclusive experience, right, arguably, that the Nazarene was hipping everyone to.
Yeah.
Guys, I got to jump. I've got my I'm in this meta crisis slide. You guys carry on. What's that? Can't hear.
We can't hear you, Jamie.
Oh, I said better leave on a strong lip than run it into the ground. So we're happy to bow it.
We'll bow out here. Maybe we'll reconvene another time. It's a nice little group. I like this. I think we should do something with Marion. Can we do 4? Maybe we get Marion Williamson in.
And I saw Doug Breshkoff join. I wanted to ask him about Team Human as well, because obviously Doug's been doing a lot of articulation of that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. I think Doug is at the moment far away. He's in Qatar, Dubai, or something like that. But yeah, we can bring him in next time.
Beautiful.
So good to talk about this with you guys. I feel like, so needed.
Fantastic. More to come.
Bye.
Cheers.